Good evening. I see that we have a great audience. We had a lot of reservations today. We're already at 167, so we'll start the program now. We have a lot of panelists, and time is precious on these events. My name is Caterina Roiatti, Principal of Tiere Studio Architecture, co-chair for the past 10 years of the Center for Architecture Historic Buildings Committee. First of all, I would like to thank the center, and particularly Joe Corbin, for assisting the Historic Buildings Committee and our repeated co-sponsor, DOCOMOMO Tri-State, in organizing this evening program, Guests and Glamour, Roadside Architecture in LA, about the photographic book by Ashok Sinha. Finally, as the exiting co-chair, I would like to also thank the center and staff for the opportunity given to me and the committee, and the continuous support without which none of the past programs would have been possible. I cannot think of a better program to close my time as co-chair, since this program looks to our more recent past, but also to what our future landmarks and the future of preservation might be. We are delighted to have John Arbuckle, President of DOCOMOMO US New York Tri-State and former Historic Buildings Committee co-chair, as our moderator. John guides tours through the AIA New York, the Municipal Art Society, and Arbuckle Architecture Tours. Previously, he was Director of Business Development at Wadsworth, Siegel and Associates. He received a Bachelor in Architecture from the University of California, Berkeley. In 2016, the AIA New York honored him with the Harry B. Ratkins Award, a recognition of his continuing work to raise the public's awareness of architecture. John will now introduce Ashok and the other panelists.
All right, thank you, Caterina, for that very kind introduction. Thanks to everyone who has made this program possible this evening. Thank you to Caterina and your co-chair, Nancy Rankin, for organizing the program and inviting me to moderate it. Thanks as well to the Marketing Communications Committee for co-sponsoring. And thanks to our speakers for participating. We are very fortunate to have Victor Newlove of Armet Davis Newlove Architects and Chris Nichols of LA Magazine joining Gas and Glamour's author, photographer Ashok Sinha, sharing some of their vast expertise in this area. In addition, thanks to the AIA Assistant Director, Joe Corbin, and our technology manager for keeping an eye on things this evening, Philip Stevens. And thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us, especially our friends joining us from Los Angeles via the AIA New York chapter and the LA Conservancy. It's fun to have a bi-coastal audience for the program. We at DOCOMOMO US New York Tri-State are very pleased to again be co-sponsoring a program with the AIA New York Chapter Historic Buildings Committee. For those of you who are less familiar with our group, we are a local chapter of an international organization working in, at last count, 69 countries around the world to preserve and educate people about modern architecture. And I should note that we have an active Southern California chapter of DOCOMOMO, for those of you there. We are a nonprofit membership organization and welcome your support. Each year we have a national theme to our education and advocacy efforts, and this year's is travel and leisure. We're particularly glad to be involved with tonight's program since it's so directly related to that theme. Let me briefly mention two upcoming DOCOMOMO programs. Later this month, our 2021 DOCOMOMO US Virtual National Symposium, May 25th to 28th, will examine Chicago, Crossroads of Modern America. Then on June 9th, our New York Tri-State chapter will host a virtual talk about the architecture and career of Max Bond Jr. Sadly, many of the roadside sites of the sort that ASHOC has documented have already been lost, and the future of some others are precarious. To cite one example, do you remember the coffee shop in the 1994 film Pulp Fiction? Built in 1956, the Hawthorne Grill in Hawthorne, originally designed by Victor Nulov's firm, was demolished in 1999, sadly. We're going to begin this evening's program with Ashok Sinha explaining the background of how this project, very much a personal labor of love, came about, presenting a number of his beautiful photographs, discussing the history of some of the sites, and discussing how he created the images. After Ashok's presentation, Chris and then Victor are going to comment. Then I'll lead a conversation among the speakers, and finally, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. As a reminder, we are offering a 10% discount on the book purchase, and you can find that information on the calendar listing on the AIA website. Now let me introduce our speakers. Ashok Sinha is an architectural and fine art photographer whose large-scale photographs capture a sense of place tied to both natural landscapes and built environments. His book, Gas and Glamour, Roadside Architecture in Los Angeles, was published in 2020. His photographs have been published by editorial outlets such as the New York Times, Architectural Digest, and Interior Design. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of the City of New York, the International Center of Photography, and the Royal Photographic Society. He is co-chair of the AIA New York Marketing and Communications Committee. He is also the founder of Cartwheel Initiative, a community-based nonprofit organization that uses photography and art to connect and collaborate with marginalized youth. Chris Nichols is a writer and historian specializing in Southern California architecture and culture. He is the author of The Leisure Architecture of Wayne McAllister, published in 2007. And by the way, two of McAllister's restaurants are in Ashok's book. Chris is a longtime historic preservationist who has been profiled in Smithsonian Magazine, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and LA Weekly. He served on the board of directors of the Hollywood Heritage Museum, and he is chairman emeritus of the Los Angeles Conservancy Modern Committee. As a modern preservationist, I give him kudos for that because that is a group that's done a great deal of really meaningful work over the years. He's a senior editor at Los Angeles Magazine, where he writes the Ask Chris column. His latest book, Walt Disney's Disneyland, was published by Taschen in 2018. Victor Nulov joined Armet and Davis Architects in 1963 and became a partner in 1972 when the firm became Armet Davis Nulov Architects. He received a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Notre Dame and is a licensed architect in the state of California and 14 other states. His firm was established in 1947 by Louis Armet and Eldon Davis, both graduates of the University of Southern California School of Architecture. The firm, located in Santa Monica, has been internationally recognized for their innovative restaurants and coffee shops. Over 4,000 of them have been built to their designs in the US and abroad, a staggering number. Today, no other firm is more closely identified with Googie architecture than Armet and Davis. 4 of the 28 projects Ashok documents in his book were designed by Victor's firm. All right, with that, Ashok.
Thank you very much, John. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be speaking tonight, sharing my book, especially with especially folks I really admire and respect. And this is a great opportunity. So thank you again for having me. I want to make this a fun discussion because that's how the project started. And as a photographer, as an architectural photographer, as many artists would attest to, is fun is what we aspire to. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. Let me know if you can see it. All right. So thank you again for joining us tonight. I'm excited to have folks from both coasts to join us for this talk and the organization supporting tonight's presentation. The book is called Gas and Glamour. And even though I'm based in New York, I'm an architectural photographer, I travel quite a bit to Los Angeles. And to me, but I have to mention that even before that, I'm a car guy. So, you know, that's the other side of me. I would have preferred a 55, but here it is, a 57 T-Bird. So that love for cars, the love for architecture, and my frequent trips to LA being the car city, culminated in this project, Gas and Glamour. And every time I think about Los Angeles, it's like a dream city, and it has this glow to it. And I think Chris aptly put it when we were talking about this interview for the magazine, I had to name this book Gas and Glamour. So for some of you who might know LA or are very familiar with, to me, I see LA as a city of two layers. On the top is the LA we are used to seeing, the highways, the high speeds and the cars moving at really, really fast speeds. And then there's another one, which is this network of surface streets, or the ordinary streets. And I sort of wanted to follow this because to me, LA is so synonymous with car culture and what these streets brought to the built environment. I really went on a quest and to find these icons, these local landmarks, as I call it, that were built around these local streets. Now, there are two things to remember here. Not only there are layers here, you have to remember car is being the center of this discussion, and there are two distinct speed limits here. So things that were built for the surface streets were meant for people driving around 35 to 40 miles an hour, whereas the highway is very different. And also LA being composed of very different smaller cities and communities, you really got that sense of this urban texture of going from one neighborhood to another, which sadly, you don't get all of that when you're traveling on the highway and it's all only an exit sign that you're seeing. So I'm going to take you on a little journey, a little clip for 10 seconds, where these surface streets were at the height of their significance. And also we're talking the post-war era, where there was a sense of optimism and it was a different culture. Driving and being in the car was part of what you did. Consumerism, there was industry, there was aviation. There was a lot going on in America as a country. The suburbs were happening, the highways were expanding. And as you would drive down these boulevards, you came across these businesses and roadside structures that you just couldn't miss. And for me, that was the crux of my research and how I started about doing this project, is that I followed these surface streets throughout the greater Los Angeles area. And it took me, since I'm based in New York and I go to New York, LA a couple of times a year, it took me about maybe a little bit more than 4 years. And I came up with a number of locations. I say 27 plus only because some locations did not end up in the book, primarily because I had a specific criteria for the book. So they had to be related to car culture, they had to be original, they had to be operational, and they had to be within the confines of LA County. And sadly, even during my process of making this book, a few icons and structures we lost. As John mentioned, and it's happening all the time, but even during this period of time, I noticed that was happening at a pretty fast pace. So unfortunately, not all the locations I photographed made into the book. So it creates a lot of images. There was a bunch of, it's not like I made these images at one shot. There were a number of visits, a number of hits and misses and whatnot to come up to this representative set of images for the book. Speaking of images, so as I was saying, the car was such an important part of everybody's lives. And obviously food establishments were the centerpiece of that. And I started my journey by photographing this classic, this movie classic, this McDonald's in Downey. And you have a few things to point out here. It has the original Speedy mascot here, or as you can see in the picture. And more importantly, I think the things to note here is this sense of this fishbowl structure, the use of glass. Stanley Clark Meston designed this iconic design, and it was essentially used as advertising for the corporation. So what we see here is architecture taking on a different form, not just the design aesthetic, but also almost as a sense of advertising. It was not only, the building itself was beckoning the motorist to come inside using signage, the use of neon glass, as well as these specific subtle signs like these arches or the lettering, the typography, whatever it may be. The whole purpose was for you to go in and try this burger. And when I was making these images, one other thing I kind of came across was I wanted to bring these, I sort of had a dilemma. I didn't want these pictures to live in the past because these are living, breathing businesses. And how do I bring that to today? So I purposely juxtaposed images. In this case, you can see a GPS of my car. I shot it through it to give you the sense of what a driver would see as he or she drove past this restaurant and what the designers and architects were thinking when they were designing this building. Moving along to more restaurants, this is one of my favorites, a very elegantly designed restaurant called Chips. And it was designed by Harry Harrison, a Taliesin trained architect, and you can see the signature of Frank Lloyd Wright in this design. There are subtleties that I want to talk about. It's not only, again, the use of glass, the warm lighting. When you're driving past it, once you want to almost stop by, have a cup of coffee. But then there is lettering. The subtleties in the lettering are that when you go past this in the corner, you have this signage that almost arrives as a space-age cacti, and you were curious as to what that could be. And then there are subtleties in the letters. They are curved to the direction of traffic. So when you're driving past it, you can read the signage chips. And not to mention the interiors. I've always loved the interiors of these places. And this is, again, another original interior. You see the counters, the upholstery. It's really, I think the beauty about these buildings is that it just gives you a sense of a different era, and it makes everything, just a normal idea or an act of having a coffee or a sandwich, so special and so well thought out just through design. Then we come to another one, which is also another Googie diner. It was built in 1958. It sits in the middle of a traffic circle. And it, again, you can see this Jetsons inspired space age futuristic roof line, the glass, this greenery in the middle. And you can almost tell that, again, the other thing is that important to point out is the signage, the lettering of pans, which actually appears one letter at a time, and then it reveals itself. So it was an animated sort of feeling when you're driving past it. It's a living thing. It wants you to come inside. And why not? I mean, look at this lavish interior. Look at these curved banquettes. Who wouldn't want to go in there? I mean, even if you didn't have any intention, the architects knew, they were very smart. They knew what to do exactly with the design and how to place it. Because imagine, this is at the corner of a three-way intersection. And no matter which way you drove, you would definitely see the interior. And then again, the details of the interiors still preserved today. It's actually, the owners can go there pretty much every day. And I went there a few times. I mean, that's the other thing about making these pictures. It didn't happen all at once. And I went once to photograph the interiors, and I had to photograph these details because they are as important to the building as the exterior was. And then I come to one of my all-time favorites, Norms. And we're lucky to have Victor Newlove on this call because I think when I first saw it, it just spoke space age to me. It just spoke something out of this world. To me, when you look at this building, it's not a promise of the future. I think that was kind of the thought process back then. The future had arrived for you. It's not a concept. This is where you go to feel what the future would be like. And this was brought out, really, if you drive down this street, it's a very wide street, and it suddenly pops out just like this, and you see through the car, you would not miss it. And it's an interesting anecdote to this. I'm going to step back a quick second because I was trying to photograph these buildings at a certain time of day. And this was a happy accident because due to LA traffic, I was late and I got there after I had missed out on the dusk light. But when I got there, the sky was pitch black and I was disappointed. And after sitting 3 hours in traffic, I said, I'm going to do it regardless. And you know what? I think this was a happy accident because I love how this building looks across this dark pitch black sky. So moving along, another one where this one I kind of came across because this in Burbank, the Bob's Big Boy. This is one of the few pictures in the building that has people in it. And the reason is that even today on Friday nights, there is a classic car show, impromptu classic car show that I came across while I was photographing this building. Not that the others were not centers of the community, but to this, I felt the cars and the place. It's essentially a boxy hamburger joint, and but how cool is that to make it into a landmark for the community, for the community to gather, just like it was back in the day. And the signage here is obviously is also actually a protected landmark, and the signage here would definitely beacon you from miles into the parking lot of this place. Speaking of food, we have to have food which is represented in a massive, gigantic scale. And in this case, like I said, as these, in this case, the donut itself was part of the building. While the other buildings were trying to beckon the driver in through their signage and their neon, some of these buildings actually put the food it was selling. In this case, the donut, and it's a massive fiberglass donut. It's in a pretty average nondescript neighborhood in La Puente, in East Los Angeles. And when you drive past it, it is almost bizarre to see the scale of this donut, and you wonder what was going on, what was the thought process. But it doesn't take long because you keep looking at it and you want to go inside and you see it from within the car and you have to go in. And that was exactly the point of it. And there's apparently a local newlywed folklore that newlyweds actually drive through this donut as a fertility rite after they get married. So who knows? So when I drove to the donut, I had to make a bunch of pictures to come up to that picture. And this is one of the pictures I made inside the donut. And it was quite an experience to drive to the donut 10 times, not buying anything, and eventually explaining to the person behind the counter, is this exactly what I was doing? And she just gave me a smart, like, fine, we've seen them all, and you're one of them. So there you go. Speaking of other interesting buildings I come across, almost like I kind of think of as Gulliver's Travels, in that land of giants, is another giant whiskey barrel in North Hollywood, the Idle Hour. And it was luckily restored recently to its original grandeur. And I went in to photograph it, and this is one of the ones that I also wanted to photograph the interior. This was designed by a Hollywood set designer, and the use of wood, the counters, is just a unique shape and you can see in this picture, actually, the historical pictures on the wall. And some of it shows the condition it was in, and luckily we have it back. I think this is a true icon in Los Angeles. Again, programmatic mimetic architecture doesn't end in food establishments. If you go out out west in Tarzana, you come across this Cadillac, and who would think that a strip mall would be a Cadillac? And if you notice closely, by the way, this was never a car dealership. It was always a strip mall. If you notice closely, those two columns underneath the wings are actually the tires of this Cadillac Fleetwood. And those circles, obviously the headlights. I've always wondered what was behind that curtain in the radiator grille. I went there 5 times. That curtain always stayed the same. So till this day, if anybody knows, please tell me, but I had no idea what that was. It intrigued me and it bugged me. So that's one of the ones that actually had a car. As you drive past it, you obviously would miss it. And to me, to my wonder, it's a difficult picture to take because you don't have much room to step back and do it. And I'll talk about process in a little bit and how I accomplished that. But it was always intrigued me. Speaking of Cadillac dealership, this is actually an original from 1949. And luckily, we still have it in this shape, beautifully preserved and restored. Some of the things to note here is the use of stucco, the huge stucco billboard with the words Cadillac, and the name Casa de Cadillac is actually the lettering. The script is from a 1949 car. One of the things I wanted to, and then again, the use of glass, the inside-outside feel, wants to bring you in, showing off the products they were selling. It was all part of this design and the subtlety that all these buildings had. And again, the close-up of the slide. So what I want to talk about a little bit is, once I started making these pictures, I also started to notice typography and how the typography also played a role in not only the period of the buildings when they were built, but also what the intention was. If you look at, if you think back to the picture of the donut hole and the writing of the donut hole to this one, the Cadillac dealership, you'll notice there's a reason why the typography was also very important that went along with the architecture. Speaking of cars, I mean, come on, who wouldn't want to go fill up their gas in a flying magic carpet like UFO gas station, whatever you may call it. Now, this is in Beverly Hills. It's an interesting story. Jin Wong, who recently passed away, designed this, and it was supposed to be, who designed LAX actually, this was supposed to be part of the master plan at LAX, did not end there. And as I put it in my book, it took flight in Beverly Hills. So again, you can see this, the use of not only the structure, the lights, and the positioning of it, where I think the best time to look at it is as night, because when night falls and it lights up, there is no way this structure, as simple as a gas station, would attract your attention. Other car-related structures I photographed were car washes. And again, this to me reminded me fins of the cars of the day, the lettering, the jet car wash, the jet age feeling of it, and the act of driving through something as simple as a car wash was well thought through, designed, and whatever you may call it, was meant for a certain purpose. That also meant car washes like this with metal trusses where you drive through. And again, notice that use of typography. How cool is that to see those letters there, and how we can imagine with with the metal trusses there and the lighting, and sometimes bizarre lighting, if you might say, it makes it pretty special to go through this car wash. I went through it a couple of times because once you go in, it's a whole other thing. But it's quite interesting and fun to be inside this car wash. Next, I come to a different type of building, which is in itself a rarity in Los Angeles. So this is, I want to say it is probably the only remaining drive-through dairy in Los Angeles, in El Monte. And this was, the dairy is actually behind this. So to the right of this photograph, which you don't see, is the actual dairy, and behind it too is the dairy. But this is the drive-through portion of it. And this is one of the buildings when I photographed it in the beginning. And when I went back in the last time, which is a year ago, this structure was, roped off. We don't know what's going to happen with it. So I was constantly racing with time as well, even though some of these structures have been designated as landmarks or cultural monuments. I think the threat of demolition or threat of modification always remains, and you always wonder what will happen to these places. So in this case, where you could imagine you could not only get your milk, you can get bread, you can get eggs. So this is one of the few remaining examples of a drive-through dairy. It was called a dairy port, and I remember I came across an old ad in the LA Times. They had almost a full-page ad, kind of talking about this architecture and what this would mean, and what a new form of architecture and new form of way of buying milk and whatnot would be. So it's kind of interesting what this building brought about. And then there would be things like the bowling alleys, where as these suburbs were happening and people were going out in their cars, obviously, they needed entertainment. And I think this firm, Powers Dairy DeRosa, built a lot of bowling alleys. Sadly, we lost one very recently, the Covina Bowl, which I started photographing. But this is in Montclair, and it's the Bowlium. And before this, I think the sport was mostly a gentleman-only sport and became a family sport after the proliferation of these bowling alleys. So in front of this picture, you see Holt Boulevard, which is a very busy street. And then you drive right in and the bowling alley is right there. And that, I think, before Route 10 was built. So there used to be a lot more traffic than there is today. So even when I went on, to photograph this on a Friday night, it was it was not that busy. And I think that's one thing I want to talk about is I noticed, to me, as much as it's important to preserve these buildings, I think the preservation aspect has to also come from how we are using these buildings. That would be an argument for preserving these icons. And these being living, breathing businesses, if people don't go there, I think the argument for preserving them also kind of diminishes. So to me, that was important thing I kind of constantly thought about when I was making these pictures. For example, this one, this is in Pasadena. It sits right across, right actually on Colorado Boulevard, which is part of the old Route 66. And you might recognize the location because it's right where the Rose Parade passes. The Moorish lettering of this is actually landmarked, and Harold Zook, who's a local architect, built this as an oasis, as a pit stop on Route 66. And again, the carport, to me, these pictures were not staged. Now, when I do my commercial shoots, everything's pretty much staged, whereas this was not staged. So I almost had to pray all the time for a car to show up, and then I would get picky because I want a car in the right color, or the lights had to be on, or they had to be doing something, and it was difficult. This one I went once, and there was a huge long line of people in front, and I said, what's going on? And I couldn't move the people, and they said, oh, there was a pizzeria that was opening up, and they was giving out free pizzas. So obviously, that shoot had to be rescheduled, and I had to come back. But this is a classic example for motel, again, which just screams car culture. Speaking of motels and bizarre architecture, if you go all the way out, this is the last one of the two remaining wigwams, and these are structured teepees. They were used as a way, very programmatic again, to attract and kind of, there's a t-shirt that's something like, have you ever lived in a wigwam? And it has a thing about the architecture. It had nothing to do with what they were trying to sell. It was, to me, it was interesting how it was, again, this is also part of that old Route 66 in LA. Which brings me to my last motel in this series, is the North Hollywood. And this is the part of North Hollywood that, on Lancashire Boulevard that connects Route 99. So a lot of these motels are sitting empty. There's not much traffic there, but if you really look closely, there are interesting, these are really cool locations. And you can tell this, from the building over the time, things have changed, how things have been translated. So you see the arrow going in at the top, and you see the arrow coming out on the pavement. So what is going there? Like what happened? But I think this area especially, these motels are disappearing at a really, really fast pace. And I was really lucky to capture this for this book. So a few minutes on how I went about making these photographs. So I think it always starts with a lot of research. And I've used research from organizations such as the Getty Foundation, the LA Conservancy, City of Los Angeles white papers, a lot of obscure blogs or notable blogs, Facebook pages. I've come across magazine articles written by people like Chris, or I've gotten blueprints from people like Victor and his architecture firm to come across a kind of a representative list. I mean, obviously I couldn't capture everything. And then what I did was I did a lot of remote scouting to use Google Street View to figure out my vantage point. But a lot of times, as you can see here, because Google Vantage Point is different, I would end up in the middle of a very, very busy street. Now, call me crazy. I would recommend you trying this at home, but to get the right picture, you sometimes have to be in the right spot. So I was getting very good at squeezing myself on the divider in the middle or somewhere else. But that's how it goes. So once I did the research with Google Street View, I'd go there, and most of the time I get a sense of where I should be and make the picture. And then the picture itself, as you can see, norms, the letters actually light up, as I was saying in the case of pans as well, it lights up one by one. And not only that, to capture all these pictures on all the latitudes of lightness and darkness, there had to be multiple exposures for the signage, for the shadows, for the highlights, for the vantage point. So essentially what you're seeing is a montage of many images. And remember that slide I said about I made 2,000 plus images? Well, that's how it becomes 2,000 plus images, because you're capturing every scenario to come to the final image, like that. And then, for example, even since I use perspective corrected lenses, you can't get the whole scene in one frame. You have to go higher, lower, basically two fields of view combined into one to get a picture that looks correct perspective-wise and looks standing straight. So this is how these images were made into final photographs. And then there's a whole other story about the wet pavement here and how crazy I went. I'm not gonna go there, another day. And then there's another whole phase where after we made the photographs, it comes in the studio. And there's another process of making these prints and going through them and saying, how do I want to see it eventually? Because I want to interpret it in a certain way. So we did that in the lab. Then it went into master printer before the books were made. And that went through another process of color conversions and test runs and test prints. And the book was printed in Germany at the height of COVID. So that was another challenge. So we had to do all that remotely sometimes, and sometimes huge FedEx rolls would come into my studio to figure these things out to come to the final book, which is Gas and Glamour. After all that, I was happy I was able to launch it November last year, and thanks to the kindness of a lot of people out there, it has made its rounds, and I'm so happy to be here and to present the book tonight. Last couple of slides, the way the book is structured, I wanted to have, there are only 3 essays in the book because it had to be photograph heavy. So there are 3 essays, one by renowned architect Jack Esterson, another by curator Sherry Littlefield. I don't know if you guys are on the call tonight, but hello if you are. And then the 3rd essay is by me. And one cool thing I wanted to include and I want to point out about this book is that we wanted to get the sense, again, I didn't want to keep anything as a secret. I want you guys to go out there and experience these things. Give these businesses a lot of money or whatever, go buy that burger, make sure they survive, because that's the ultimate preservation in any city. So what we did was we put in these QR codes at the back of the book. So you can point your phone, you can go to the business, even if you're not in LA, you can see the place through Google Maps and whatnot. So I thought that was a really nice thing that my publisher brought about. And I was really happy that this was a way of sharing the story of these buildings and what they meant. And not just, again, this book is not a relic. It is meant to be in a living, breathing document, and hope these structures survive and stay that way. So thank you again for this opportunity. That's the website for the book. That's my information at the bottom. And I sincerely would love to keep in touch with all of you. And I really appreciate you spending the time this evening, this afternoon with me and with us to talk about this fun project. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashok. Chris, now, would you like to share some of your thoughts about Ashok's project and
Sure.
architecture.
Yeah, glad to. Congratulations. It's so wonderful to see all my favorite places all shined up and perfect and beautiful and looking great. So thank you very much for really helping people appreciate them, because sometimes, like with the car wash, there are encrustments of the modern age stuck onto them that it's more difficult to see the original lines. And so I'm glad that you use lighting and effects to try to bring out all the grandeur. We did a story on your book in my magazine, which has been around since 1961 when it looked like that. And you know, I'm always out there looking for great stories to tell, and I love that this one came from New York, from someone across the country that appreciated our wonderful architecture and car culture as much as you do. When I was a teenager, I got this book for Christmas, changed my life. I called Alan Hess out of the phone book, and he could see how worn out my copy is here. But Alan turned me on to Armand Davis, introduced me to Victor, introduced me to Alden Davis. And I got to meet, here's my other book, Wayne McAllister, the great architect that did that Bob's Big Boy that you included. And, you know, when you hear dealing with the recent past, which was a lot more recent 30 years ago, and hearing it from the horse's mouth really made me appreciate it so much more, and really made me get out there and fight for this stuff. And all of us in the preservation community in LA, we're doing something really new. In 1984, when our group, the LA Conservancy Modern Committee, was founded, you know, the Downing McDonald's was 30 years old, you know, and so it was really hard to get this stuff taken seriously back then. And since, there have been a lot of other groups that have started around the country, and finally, you know, these buildings have achieved their place in the pantheon, you know, and I'm glad that people, you know, treat it much better now. But again, still, like with Covina Bowl this week, I mean, it is a partial preservation solution. Part of the building is sticking around, but most of it's coming down. So, you know, again, what you say about going there and spending your money and spending your time and really letting these places be a part of your, you know, part of your experience is really important. And, you know, going in there and giving the owner a hard time when they want to change something, you know, and being a resource for when they need help. You know, when the owner of a place that needs help with their neon sign gives me a call, I've got a whole list of people that can go and help them. When they can't find a certain kind of light fixture, I dig in and try to help them find, you know, a movie crew broke a light fixture at Pans. And, you know, I helped them find, you know, all these people I work with pretty often and try to keep up with them. And one of your, well, I'll answer it later, but one of the buildings in the Q&A is a preservation win that's happening right now, which is great. The Idle Hour was a big win. That was a completely decrepit, uninhabitable shell. It had been closed for 30 years. It was an absolute wreck. And I wrote a landmark nomination for it. I found a potential buyer for it. You know, he found the money, made it happen. I scared off all the other possible buyers with Scooby-Doo ghost stories, you know, and in the end, he put his back into it and a bunch of money, and now it's a hugely successful new bar that is based on, you know, the original. And it's really, it really fills my heart with joy to see these places come back and to see the old ones carry on as well as they do. Pans and Norms and Chips and all the greats here in LA. And so, you know, thank you again for shining a light on them. And anybody that comes to California, please stay at the Saga Motel, you know, have go bowl a game at the Bowlium and have dinner at Pans. And when I first would go to Armand Davis back in the, you know, 30 years ago, gosh, Eldon Davis was there. Helen Fong would come around. All the original people that were still around were part of our Jack Laxer, the great 3D photographer. We did a big tribute show to them, and we got to have a lot of these people that were still there from the origins of it come out and speak. And I mean, that's really, you know, besides going to the places, knowing the people, is so important, I think, in understanding the significance of these creations. So I've known Victor for 30 years, and Victor's been a great friend to preservation. He's done a terrific job of maintaining the history of the place, and you see behind him, there's blueprints, there's drawings on the wall. Their office is like a wonderful little museum of Googie, and I love and admire Vic. He's a wonderful guy. So I'd like to, if I can, introduce Victor Newlove of R.M.A. Davis New Love in Santa Monica.
Thank you. It just dawned on us today that next year will be our 75th anniversary for the firm. And we long ago stopped doing really coffee shops. We now do mostly fast food restaurants. That's what keeps the doors open. We do Wendy's, Burger King's, El Pollo Locos, and Dunkin' Donuts, Randy's Donuts, Taco Bell's, and occasional Denny's. We used to do 300 or 400 Denny's at a time. We used to do hundreds of Bob's Big Boys at a time too, for that matter. And I was remembering the Wayne McAllister building over in Burbank, Toluca Lake, I think is what we used to call it. I doubled the size of that restaurant back in the 1970s. And I remember having to restore the sign because it was a mess. And so we spent a lot of money, but Bob's, the corporate headquarters, Marriott at the time, agreed to spend a lot of money on that sign. And I remember that was a big deal. It's been a lot of fun to be around people like Eldon Davis and Louis Armé and Helen Fong. I learned a lot. They were mentors of mine, and it's been a joy to be an architect, I can tell you that. I used to, and I still enjoy looking at some of their buildings. I think are just tremendous. I still like coming into them. I was in Pans about a week ago helping him. And of course, we did a little renovation over at the Denny's and not the Denny's, excuse me, the Norms back in La Cienega, the Flying Wing, as I called it. And then we had, and I was remembering all of the Norms that I did do after that I actually did. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great ride. And I still enjoy the practice of architecture after these years. And by the way, I still have a license in New York. I used to do a lot of work around Albany and Rochester and those areas. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Victor. All right. So let me throw out a few questions for you gentlemen, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I'm curious, I mean, sort of to all of you, whoever wants to respond, I mean, to what extent are these buildings now appreciated and valued by the general public in Southern California? And are they more or less appreciated than the canonical modernism, things like works by Neutra and Schindler and the case study program? What are your takes on that?
Well, I immediately think of two lines from the Book of Googie. You know, one is to think of how many people have experienced the greats, you know, and then think of how many people are able to experience great architecture through a place like Norm's, or a place like, you know, one of these coffee shops where you can go in and for the price of a cup of coffee, you have this grand experience around you. And then also Alan has a great quote in his book where he says, we need buildings, you know, we don't just need buildings with good taste, we need buildings that taste good. And as far as the appreciation, I mean, gosh, I like 35 years ago, you know, the mid-century revival seemed like a trend. You know, I thought, you know, when the first replica Eames chairs and replica bubble lamps started coming out, and the Herman Miller clocks and Howard Miller clocks, and you know, And then the 90s went by, and then the aughts went by, you know, the teens and the aughts, and like, we're still doing it. And, you know, and Mad Men came around and everybody and appreciated it again. And it's funny, it just turned into like, you know, there's Victorian, there's Craftsman, there's mid-century modern. It's just part of the canon. It's not a bad thing, you know, it's a bedrock part of the design history. And finally that's here, you know.
Mhm.
And what I want to say, I think what Chris you said, and about the question around appreciation on a very personal level, because half of my family is in Los Angeles, and that's why I went there so many times, or I go there so many times, is that a lot of these structures that I photographed were even unknown to people who are local. And they always wondered like how I found them and what interests me so much. And even when I was photographing some of them, people would stop me and ask me, what do you see in this that you are here to photograph a coffee shop or whatever, it may be a car wash, that kind of stuff. So I think, but you know, people recognize the case study houses and whatnot, I think, but these are within the neighborhoods. And sometimes I felt like people didn't realize that they were there until you tell them a little bit and you tell them more and they want to know more. So I think awareness, the more it is, the more there is, people get interested in architecture.
Definitely, definitely. So another question for any of you who want to answer it. So Norms by Arment and Davis, the one on La Cienega, was designated a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument in 2015. And the book notes that the George's 50s Diner by Wayne McAllister was locally designated. But are there efforts underway to designate more of and protect more of these sites with official designations?
Well, I can speak on that as well, but I mean, you know, the George's 50s Diner, by the way, was nearly destroyed in a fire a year ago and rebuilt. There was a designated building in Downey called Johnny's Broiler, which was illegally demolished on a weekend with the power and water still running. Yeah, and much of it was gone, at a rental bulldozer, by the way, and much of it was gone. And eventually, through great efforts of my colleagues in the Modern Committee, mostly Adrian Biondo, the building was rebuilt from the original blueprints. How often does that happen? You know, when something is gone, it's usually gone. But that came back. And then somebody asked a question in the Q&A about an Armand Davis coffee shop called Stanley Burke's, later known as Corky's, 1958, closed about 2 years ago, and it is about to it's about to be restored as a new restaurant. So it'll be more of a fast casual type restaurant instead of the coffee shop. And gosh, do we appreciate how the luxury of a coffee shop, elaborate landscaping, free parking, luxurious finishes like terrazzo and custom artwork. They would commission artists to do light fixtures and booth dividers and murals and dimensional stuff. And Armand Davis loved Hans and Betsy Werner, who did this resin art, which was just spectacular. And I mean, Victor doing, Victor, does a Wendy's ask you to do that? Use the most expensive materials you can. Bring in custom art.
Never.
Can you give me more landscaping? Can you,
No, never does that happen. It's pretty rare.
Tell me about your restroom research.
Well, a lot of the architecture, like you said, we hired artists to do just about everything, or we sat down and designed our own light fixtures, door pulls. We would go to Herman Miller and get our furnishings. We use George Nelson light fixtures, or we would again commission Hans and Betsy Werner, who were pretty damn good artists, to do murals on the walls and screen dividers the clocks, design our own clocks. And then we would help the owners a lot of times with what the menus would look like and what the waitresses or waiters were going to wear. Tried to, and the small wares, what kind of dishes. I got involved in that on many, many occasions with a lot of different restaurants. But no, not on these fast food restaurants. They have though we do come up with the original designs quite often with, let's say, an El Pollo Loco or something like that. And we do tweak the designs of a Burger King. But no, nobody says spend a lot of money. I don't think even our original clients wanted to spend a lot of money, but they recognized that they had to do something different. We were greatly influenced, by Neutra and Schindler and Lautner and people like that in our designs. We actually go back some on these coffee shops. The purity of the designs are really there, believe it or not. They're meant to be something that is a throwback to what we considered contemporary architecture at the time. So we felt that we needed to follow that style of architecture. That the people that would come in, the normal person that would come in off the street could see this style of architecture rather than, let's say, a Neutra house. The only time you'd ever see a Neutra house was when you went into somebody's house and saw it. This was a public architecture, the restaurants that we did. And anyway, that's.
Well, I was thinking of how you told me that you put so much time and effort into making the restrooms bulletproof. And I thought,
yes,
steel mirrors, and I thought that's not what they should be working on, but they have to.
Well, you had to be practical. The restaurant, again, is a food factory. And you got to think in terms of, well, you're producing food, but then you're also open. A lot of these places were open 24 hours. And there's a different clientele. I don't know if you've ever been in a restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning after the bar is closed. You really, the restrooms, we would put tile on the ceilings in order to protect the ceilings. And I even thought about using, we were doing work for the LA County detention facilities, and we were thinking about even using stainless steel water closets, the one that we use in the cells. Really thought about it too. Everything had to be bulletproof, and that's what our clients wanted. And anyway, that's it.
I was just going to, Victor, following up on the idea of influences. Some aspects of your firm's work and other projects in Ashock's book have been compared with some of Frank Lloyd Wright's leading work. Lautner, of course, was at Taliesin, and Ashock mentioned that Harry Harrison was at Taliesin. Was Wright were you conscious of a particular influence of Wright at all? I mean, did Arnett and Davis admire him?
I think that the designers that worked for our firm were very aware of Frank Lloyd Wright's work. And we had people that had worked for Lloyd Wright, as an example. John O'Neill came from there. And I knew a lot of people that had worked for Frank Lloyd Wright myself in the old days. We were greatly influenced by his architecture. I was. I thought that his work. We tried to emulate a lot of his work in some of the Palm Springs work that we did for hotels. Like Sands hotels, things like that. And I think when we got into some of the work in Vegas, interior work, same story. We liked that interior, the feeling, that would have naturalness or whatever he had. So,
and John Lautner did the original Googies, And
Yes, he did.
Our man Davis did the second Googies.
Right. We got stuck with the name, but he did the original Googie's architecture. I only met the guy once, and it was up at Silvertop, and which I thought was an extraordinary house that could have been one hell of a restaurant. Sorry, it just, I kept thinking, wow, could I make this into a restaurant? But yeah, it's the only time I ever met him. I talked to Wayne McAllister a couple of times, though. I remember he seemed like a nice enough guy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Victor, another question for you. Credit in the book for a couple of your firm's project is given to Arme and Davis, along with Helen Fong.
Yes.
In the 50s and 60s, we all know, women did not have a lot of opportunities in architectural practice in this country, nor did they get a whole lot of credit for the work they did. Can you talk a little bit about her contributions?
Well, not in our firm. I mean, she did the interiors. She had a concept of she knew color and she knew materials. We were always trying different materials. As an example, in Bob's Big Boys, we used to use natural cork. I mean, as a material for the ceilings, regular cork, not just plain, something from Armstrong. We would, if we had to do stained glass window as an example, we had artists like Roger Carrera who did our work. She would bring all of these artists in, especially Hans and Betsy Warner. Betsy Hancock was a great artist, and Helen used to use her to do a lot of the work, along with Hans, of course. It was, she would pick the furnishings out. She would pick the type of terrazzo colors, the designs, work with us individually as designers for the canopies. Let's say there would be over the counters, work with the designs. She always made sure that everything was a very interesting looking. It was like eye candy, everything was interesting. Nobody fell asleep in one of our restaurants. Nobody was allowed to fall asleep in one of our restaurants. The idea was keep them awake, have them eat their food and leave, because we wanted to turn the tables over.
Right.
But the architecture and the art, it was like, gosh, it was just like coming into a Hollywood set, if you think about it. Of course, you had the animation of the exhibition cooking, and the people that were coming in all the time. But the artwork and everything kind of like tied together. Like I said, she would even sit around and design the menus. She did everything. Well, she taught me to be an architect. I can say that. I remember the first time I ever, it was kind of a kick. I didn't even know who she was. And I found this hand on my shoulder, and she told me, and I was whistling and I was drafting, and she said, we don't whistle while we work here. And I looked up at her and I said, well, that doesn't look like Snow White. And I said, that must be the boss. And I found out right away that this was the real leader in the firm. She was the king of the queen of the drafting room, and kind of resented at times by the male. It was male dominated at the time. There was not that many women. We did have women architects, but not of her caliber. And she was just knew what she was doing, knew how to run a business.
I always
A lot of architects don't know how to run a business.
It's true.
They really don't. She knew how to run a business.
That's true. Chris, what were you saying?
Victor, I remember Eldon always sort of deferring to her. Well, what does Helen think? And she would always sort of get her opinion on something pretty.
Well, she would tell you.
Yeah.
Just going back to the photographs. Ashok, one thing I was wondering about, I noticed almost all the shots are dusk or night shots. Now, is there a particular rationale behind those choices?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the use of neon and the lights and the signage, the whole building comes alive at dusk and nighttime. And without capturing that part of it, I wouldn't have the glamour in my title. So that brought along the glamour. And I think also it was kind of a subtle nod to an era. So the book is sequenced from dusk to night, the pictures are. And we started kind of planned it out that way. And like I told you about the happy accident, and that actually kind of solidified the idea that, yeah, this should continue and we should do it this way, because that's when you see not only the building, but you kind of have that sense of inside outside.
Can I make a comment about the signage, please?
Sure.
We were restoring the norm signs, and back, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I don't know what it was. And originally those signs used to wash and flash. They were designed to, they had the vertical neon, which actually turned themselves on and off, and they would wash and flash. And I once asked Helen, I said, what was the concept? Because the original design was by Eldon Davis, I remember that. But she said she wanted to see the sign dance. And I thought, what a comment. She wanted that thing to actually physically dance. Try to photograph that though. And I can imagine you almost have to have it when it's always on, because the sign is meant to be moving at all times. And then all of a sudden it would flash on and on. It was kind of a kick. Norms was like that. And I think a lot of the signs, of course, in Vegas, and I think that we were influenced by a lot of the Vegas signs. That's all I have to say.
Victor, was it Helen or Eldon that said that the sign was inspired by pennants in a used car lot? I remember hearing that.
Yeah, the guy, Norm Roybar, who I only met once in my life, twice maybe, I don't know. I used to know his wife and I know his children, or, you know, those people. But he was a used car salesman, I believe. And the idea behind the restaurant was originally like a car sales showroom, except there were people in there and they were serving food. And that was the whole idea behind it. Yeah, I can imagine it was like car pennants, but I thought of them more as airplane wings, because, you know, all the cars in those days kind of looked like, you know, they had wings, they had fins and all this sort of thing. And this was the style. Futuristic, what we call it, I guess, in those days. That's it.
I think I want to make a quick comment about that signage and photographing it. Yes, it was indeed one of the most challenging things that I came across, photographing the norm signage. And there are another example I want to say is the Van de Kamp's Dairy, which is now Denny's, I believe, with the big windmill, and that moves. And to photograph that with the movement and the precision of the lighting and all of it was quite a lot of work, but fun nonetheless.
I have a question for you. Did you ever try doing three-dimensional photographs? 3D?
No, so funny you say that. I actually wanted to capture that experience, especially buildings like the donut hall, where I try to explain to people, like, you know, you drive through the donut, they're like, what do you mean? And I actually looked into prototyping it using a Google tool called Google Poly. It's freely available, and using Google Cardboard, which essentially, you just put I was using found 3D footage that Google Street View produces as a feed, and you just feed it through it, and you would have this whole sense of, I did that with pans as a test. I never got around to it. But to your point, yeah, I think that is a big part of the experience. Would be the next, I think, could be an iteration of it.
All right. This has been a terrific conversation. Why don't we take some questions and comments from the audience? I have a couple of that are just comments here that I want to share, and then we'll get to a question. One is from it says Karen Davis here, Eldon's daughter. The Witch Stand and Bob's Big Boy were my go-to favorites in high school. I recall going with my dad to inspect the Witch Stand in the 50s in the framing stage and collecting the metal electrical slugs. Sorry, it's gone. Coral, used in most of the coffee shops, is still my favorite color. So thank you, Karen, for sharing that comment with us. Got another one here from Nelson Bracken. Says that Bruce Goff used to tell me that when Googies was first published, Alan Hess's book, that the OU students would try to out-Googie each other. So that he worked for Goff in the 1970s. And then the first question we got here from Amy Evans, she said, I'd love to hear from Victor and Chris, being Los Angeles based like me, which building is your favorite and which one do you lament being gone? Corky's in Sherman Oaks by Armand Davis was my local hangout for 10 plus years. And my heart broke when the owner sold it and it got fenced and graffitied. And let's have Ashok answer that question too, if he will, what his favorite is and most lamented loss is. Who wants to go first?
Well, I do want to say that back in 1988, the Witch Stand closed. I got to see it before it closed, and it was very original and beautiful and wonderful. And then I went back and I broke in a few months later after it was abandoned, and the flagstone had been chipped off, and they had made a little fire pit out of it, and there was water coming up out of the through the terrazzo somehow. They had broken through to some water main, and it was it was prehistoric and a ruin. And the futuristic ruins, that's something that's always blown my mind. But it's not gone. It's back. I mean, it was a wreck and destroyed, but it was restored as a health food restaurant called Simply Wholesome, and it's still there and still open and still thriving. It's in the book. And as far as things that are gone that I lament, my parents dated at an Armand Davis coffee shop called the Huddle, and those Huddle restaurants were like, if we dig the stuff they did at Pan's, that guy had a budget 10 times what Pan's did. The Huddle restaurants were absolutely insane as far as artwork and elaborate, every extra you could order from them, every extra that Helen and Eldon could offer up were in these Huddle restaurants. My gosh.
Those Huddle restaurants, most of them were designed by Lee Linton, actually.
Lee Linton. Oh,
yeah, it was
at your place. My gosh.
Yeah, he was a designer at our place, and he used to do the Huddle restaurants for Cummings, I think it was, the guy that owned it. And I lamented that too. I missed the one that was at the Santa Monica airport, because as a child, they used to take me into that restaurant and I was just amazed. I thought it was a great restaurant. I had no idea that I'd eventually end up working for the company that did it. And hadn't got a clue of that, but I missed it. And I even one time I was at a Christmas party with the owner's wife, and we were talking about the restaurant chain. But yeah, Lee Linton was quite a good designer that we had at the firm before I got there, and he ended up moving to Vegas and did a lot of work in Vegas.
Victor, can you help me remember? I think Eldon said that that Lee Linton would come up with an illustration. That's the first step, and then you would figure out you would engineer these impossible roof lines. You would do all that after the concept was done.
Yeah, if you take a look at the renderings we have here in the office, which we have a lot of them, and they're designed, their original renderings by Lee Linton. Hell, it's amazing. Could you even build it? The answer is no. What you did is you did the best you could to use there were exaggerations. They were like a big set design, and a complete exaggeration of what the restaurants look like. But I have a bowling alley one. I think it was the Rodeo Bowl, where you have a big bowling pin with a bowling ball on the top that revolves, excuse me, around and around, and where the fingers are, light shine out of the fingers. And then there was the bowling ball is covered with scintillating lights. I mean, can you imagine a planning department allowing something like that? I mean, not in 100 years. It looked great though, and I got the rendering in my house. I kept it. I figured it's a work of art. Anyway, yeah, very difficult to. You had to figure out structurally. Our structural engineers were amazing to be able to figure out how to make our buildings float. I mean, what they did? They literally floated. There was a lot of steel involved. There was a lot of tremendous grade beams, anything to keep the thing up in an earthquake. So, and most of them are, you know, the ones that survived are amazingly well designed too.
Speaking of bowling alleys, I want to say though, Victor, my personal, the loss that I kind of lament is actually the Covina Bowl, only because it's been a very personal thing for me. When I started doing this project, or many Los Angeles, I saw that live and breathing. It was like a thing, you know. And then when I conceived of the project, I said, oh, I got to include that because it's so bizarre. It was like this Egyptian Polynesian themed bowling alley. It's not you don't see that in the East Coast. It's a very
wasn't that De Rosa, the company? Yeah, he used to work for us.
Wow.
I mean, De Rosa I never got to meet the guy. I saw him several times and I wanted to meet him and I never did, which is too bad. I used to work with him at the State Board of Architectural Examiners. And I kept saying to myself, I think I'll go over and talk to him. Never did. And then all of a sudden he died. That was the end of it. So he used to work for our firm. A lot of these people work for our firm. I mean, it's amazing. We had, we'd have 20, 30 people working for us. We have 20 some odd people working for us now.
President Daly and DeRosa were the Armani Davis of bowling alleys. I mean, and,
Yes.
You know, and they did absolutely incredible work reinventing the whole sport of bowling into a people's sport, a country club that anybody could go to, with lounges, with live music, with with playrooms for children. I've got a book project I'm working on right now on that subject. Covina Bowl is very, very hard to take. I spent my childhood there. My grandparents lived 3 blocks away. Hugely important to me growing up and now. And I know that they worked really hard to come up with a plan that would preserve the character defining features. The sign will remain, the pyramid will remain, the coffee shop will remain, but it won't be a community bowling center anymore. It'll be condos. So, when you save the architecture, but do you save the soul? And that's in preservation. That's usually that's a trade-off that comes up pretty often. I think that the kind of like with the one thing we were talking about, the Stanley Burks, the Corkies, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's a very, very different, it's food, but it's a very different kind of use as compared to what ADN did.
There's one that I mourn. I'm not as well informed on the subject as you, gentlemen, but Ships Westwood. I fondly recall visiting in the early 1980s, and in doing a little research in advance of this, I was actually very surprised to learn that the demolition of that was one of the things that brought about the establishment of the Modern Committee of the LA Conservancy. So the whole origin story of the Modern Committee has to do with Googie coffee shops, which I find fascinating.
Ships and Tiny Nailers, which was a great McAllister style drive-in, a car hop drive-in, designed by Douglas Honnold, who would come out of the office of John Lautner. So, Tiny Nailers and Ships and Googies all closed around the same time and all came down. And, I was a teenager and I heard about it and I got very excited and I jumped in and did what I could starting, at 17. But, even my youthful enthusiasm couldn't go far enough to save, so many places I tried to save. My hometown McDonald's among them. You know, I really tried to keep, just like the one in Downey, we had a great red and white store, and I tried to save it, and didn't work out. But, you know, I mean, historic preservation, oh my gosh, there are 10,000 factors that could go wrong. You know, it's so hard to save a building, as you all know. And even when you do, then what happens when there's a new owner? What happens when the zoning changes? What happens when the neighborhood changes? You have to go back and save it again, you know. And it's a lifelong commitment to keep these places going, and at least for me. And my friends in the Modern Committee, you know, Peter Maruzzi, for example, started his own Modern Committee in Palm Springs, you know, and people that have come through our group start their own groups, spread the word. You know, some of our people have done an HPOZ out for the Eichler tract out in the San Fernando Valley. Our group was a great nexus for people interested in all aspects of modern preservation. And we did lectures, exhibitions, tours, and advocacy for decades.
Chris, you know that I worked on Eichler houses when I was at Jones and Emmons. And I worked with Joe Eichler on, I mean, I was a draftsman. They allowed me to talk to this guy. I mean, I never forget it. But he used to come in all the time, and we'd be working on the Eichler houses. We were doing tract houses up around Palo Alto or something like that. And I have a set of drawings somewhere in the house, but I don't know what my wife did with them, of an Eichler the house that I drafted up. It was kind of
You worked at A. Quincy Jones like in 1962 or 3, right?
1967, 68.
Oh, okay.
Around that particular time. This is right towards the end of Eichler's life, I believe. And he used to come in as a little short guy with a big cigar. I remember that. And everybody smoked in those days. Yeah, I loved the buildings. I loved his designs. He told Jones what he wanted. I mean, you know, he wanted the almost very Japanese inspired work with central atriums and all of that. I thought, God, what a great, you know, concept. So I wish I could find the drawings. I got to go look for them again, I guess.
Yeah.
Turns out I actually grew up in Palo Alto near several Eichler tracts. And some of my best friends when I was growing up grew up in Eichler houses, maybe including the one you were involved in there, Victor.
Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah.
Well, I even went to Palo Alto Military Academy when I was a kid.
No kidding.
Yeah, right. Anyway.
You got a comment here from Sandra Cully. It says, it would be great to record Victor and Chris in an oral history conversation. Delightful to hear the personal stories they have experienced. A number of the questions are about specific buildings. One question to Ashok, did you consider any drive-ins? You don't have any drive-in movie theaters?
I did. There was a Kontiki, I want to say, I came across a couple of Polynesian themed drive-in movie theaters. A lot of them, I think, were converted into local flea markets or swap and meet kind of things. So a lot of them were not original or torn down and been in, and there was nothing, there was one, like I said, that I want to say it was, I don't know, maybe Chris knows, Kontiki, or there's a Polynesian themed drive-in.
Well, currently?
Yes.
There's one right by the Bolium called the Mission Tiki.
Oh, Mission, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yes, Mission Tiki. I think
That's
actually
It has about this much time left. The property was sold, but it's a 1950s Mission, California Mission themed drive-in that about 15 years ago became a Tiki themed drive-in. And it's pretty great. And I mean, just as far as the COVID year drive-in experience in LA, by far the best. It's terrific. They've done all kinds of neat programming, and it's just really well run and great. But then the guy told me, what do you do when someone dangles X million dollars in front of you? And he sold out. Somebody mentioned influence on pop culture in the questions, and I just wanted to note that these buildings weren't influenced by the Jetsons. The Jetsons were influenced by these buildings. That, you know, that these animators at Hanna-Barbera, which by itself is a pretty great Googie building, the Hanna-Barbera studios were going to, you know, we're passing Tiny Nailers, we're passing Googie coffee shops all the time in their commute. And so I love to think that our LA roadside, you know, phenomena, you know, was projected into the far off Jetsons future by those guys. And that's become America, you know, it's become the world's kind of shorthand for the future is the Jetsons, which is using coffee shop architecture as its, you know, basis. and Lautner and all the greats out of LA. The Jetsons' home looks very much like a Lautner, like Chemisphere, you know.
Right. Yeah, I think the question was how does this wonderful architecture reflect the larger culture with the rise of pop art, the space race, pop music, idols, car design, industrial design, mobility for all? Well, certainly related to pop art. I mean, those massive donuts and the teepees look an awful lot like pop art to me, for instance, among other things.
And Andrew Shea's great painting, Norm's La Cienega on Fire, Victor, which was exhibited at the LA County Museum of Art with a photo of your building by Jack Laxer.
Right, I remember giving him a photo. And then we bought several of them. You could buy, you know, reproductions of them. Like I have a son that's got one, and then we have one here in the office. And I think that's kind of, I have a Rocher painting. I have a Rocher work at home, but it's not that. I wish it were that. God, that would be terrific.
Yeah.
Pop art, geez. Anyway.
Another question we have here is, when the second layer, the elevated freeways were built, how did that affect the roadside world?
Well, I can answer for the Denny's that we used to do. Were always roadside and off of, you know, not freeways, because they had to be roads that were accessible so people could drop off and then go into the restaurants. In Los Angeles, the feeder streets are so important that you could put a restaurant on a feeder street, as in La Cienega or Sepulveda or one of those streets, and you could get enough traffic on there for the restaurants to survive. The biggest problem, I think, with the restaurants were they took so much, bar restaurants, they took so much space for all of this nice free parking, and that it became uneconomical to maintain that big of a space for a restaurant and make money, and destroy them eventually. But roadside, that's why we're doing nothing but fast food restaurants, and very seldom do we ever do an actual theme restaurant or anything like that. Though I've done our fair share in those days. We used to do Marie Callender as an example, and they're gone. I was trying to think of some of the others. I was thinking of Biff's restaurant. Remember up in, they destroyed that one. That was the one that we designed that looked like a flying saucer that had just landed, and it got destroyed. And why? Because it was uneconomical to keep the restaurant there. It was too valuable of a piece of property.
I think Hitchcock mentioned the witch stand being on, you know,
Slauson.
kind of a highway, like Imperial Highway and Slauson and Rosemead Boulevard, and these were the highways before the freeway system was built. And so there's still sort of the way you get from, you know, it's hard, I suppose, for someone in New York to appreciate the incredible miles that we drive to get to these far-flung suburban communities all the time. But you know, they're all on these old major highways, which are still sort of local major highways. You know, there's the big road that connect all these 88 cities that we have here in LA.
Well, Wilshire Boulevard was that way. You know, I mean, my mother tells me when she was driving in, she was born in Los Angeles in 1912, and it was a trek to go from Los Angeles, downtown LA, to Santa Monica, as an example. Like, you used to stop on Sawtell on the way, and there was nothing between there. It was just like open fields, and you would go to these one town after another, like you're saying, which now became districts. But the roads remained, and they were the feeder roads.
All right, Joe is giving us the heads up that we should wrap things up. Gentlemen, would you like to make any closing comments?
I'll go real quick. I think one thing I wanted to mention is I always wondered when I was making these pictures about the future of these buildings. As much as preservation is important, how can we make it relevant? And one of the things that I kept thinking, like, why couldn't these parking lots become charging stations? And why couldn't you charge up your car for a top-up charge, which is between 15 to 20 minutes, have a burger or a coffee, and preserve this building and this business, and bring these to today. So that's some other day discussion. Just want to throw that out.
Did you see that tweet from Elon Musk where he said he wants to build a 50s drive-in?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm gonna give him a call.
Vic?
Yeah, right.
Right. All right. Well.
Yeah, the one of your buildings, the Penguin in Santa Monica, was restored recently as a Mel's Drive-In, and it has all sorts of infrastructure that you don't think, you know. It has all this stuff that you need for code and like buried oil tanks and things, but it has a huge bike area. The new Corky's and Van Nuys, which the new tenant will come in, they have a huge bike thing. They may have EV chargers at the Mel's in Santa Monica, I believe. But yeah, adapting it to something that makes it more attractive to people, you know, it never hurts, obviously.
All right. All right. Well, thank you all. This has been a terrific conversation. Thank you, Ashok, for sharing your beautiful images with us, and picking up on Ashok's phrase, go buy that burger. Support these businesses. All right. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for participating. Thanks for viewing.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
Thank you, Chris.
It was an honor to
Victor.
talk to you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, John.
Bye.